This is Glenda Carroll for the Mystery Writers of America, Northern California chapter. And this is another Facebook Saturday Live. This is a place where authors, local authors, almost all of them, have a chance to give a short, focused talk on on crime, the craft of crime. So what we're doing today is slightly different. We are having two people talk about let's put it always outline versus never outline. So that's the plotters. Those are the ones that outline versus the pantsers who to go by the seat of their pants. That's me. So we have two sides to this. Claire Johnson, who is our current president of MWA NorCal, and Margaret Dumas, who writes the movie, let me just get this correct, the movie Palace Mysteries. So they are going to take either side and discuss it. Now, those of you who are watching, you can put your comments in the comment section on Facebook, and we'll get to them a little bit later. And so we're going to start with the very well organized Margaret, and it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I wasn't always organized and I wasn't always a plotter. My first 4 or 5 books, I was more the way Claire will talk about later. If I knew the beginning, I knew vaguely how it would end, and I always knew like the pivot point, the thing that would happen where everything would change. And that was it for my first 4 or 5 books. I only became a plotter out of necessity when I got a book contract for a series for the Movie Palace Mysteries that I had pitched the idea. So I didn't have a finished book. And they said, great, we want 3 of these and we want them in 20 months. So I knew that I had to know what I was doing. I couldn't just sort of like the way I had usually done drift. So I did, for each book, I did, and I'm going to share the screen here because I can. For each book, I did like a 1-pager, like this. This is for the 3rd book, so it's more filled out. But just, things, characters who had been introduced, or characters that I knew I wanted to talk about, major plot points, stuff that I didn't want to forget, just something that I could show to the publisher and say, this is basically what's going to happen. Just really easy 1-pager. When I started writing the Movie Palace books is when I realized I needed to get a grip more on my planning and mainly my timeline, because they take place in a movie theater and they talk about the movies that they're showing. So I have to remember the movies change on Tuesdays and Fridays, and on Tuesday we're showing these movies, and on Friday we're showing these movies, and the next week it's others. So I just sort of happened upon using, I'm going to share again, using a calendar. And this is the calendar, this is the entire calendar of the 3rd book. And the red are the movies that are playing. And the pencil is like the beats of what's going to happen. And it would start with, I know that I need to have the midnight movie of Desk Set, I know is going to be a big scene. And so I have to figure out what has to happen in the days leading up to that in order to get to the point where it can be a big scene. I know that I'm going to have a seance, and so I need to figure out everything that has to happen before the seance and then the ramifications. So it just helped me visualize it all by putting on a calendar. And then I also, these are the show times, because I was always forgetting when the show times were. This is my word count because I'm obsessive about word count on an ongoing basis. Anyway, and then for each of these sort of beats, like the seance, I would have an index card. And you can, this is actually like a 4x6 index card. And I would just write down on the index card what I wanted to happen in that scene. Maybe a little bit of dialogue, maybe, remember to do this, remember this person is in the room. Again, you can see where I'm keeping track of my word count. And then as I got to it and as I handled all of those things, just cross them out. Or sometimes I say, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that, and I'll cross it out there. So that was basically what I was doing. Very low tech. By the time I finished the third book, this is the stack of cards. So this is how many scenes are in the book. And that has all worked, except then last November, when we were planning the Sisters in Crime MWA joint holiday party, somebody mentioned that she was using something called Plotter. And I downloaded it and I kind of fell in love. So that's what I'm trying to use now. And I'll show you the work in progress for my next book. What it is I've sort of jury-rigged it so that instead of the calendar, I have the days, the days of the week, and like the asterisk days, I know what movies are playing. Rear Window and Vertigo are going to be playing on there. And I know that on that day, there's going to be an aha moment. And so what comes off of, so it's sort of like, this is my calendar. This is what I used to write in pencil. And then coming right off of that is what I used to do on the card. And I'm kind of loving it. Now, I haven't finished the book yet, so I don't know if it's going to last me all the way through, but I really kind of like having the big picture and then having the various plot lines over here. This is sort of what I used to do on the one pager. And now I've got those on the right and the scenes that relate to it, and it's all on a timeline. And it's really nifty because you can have, like all of your characters, all of your notes, all the stuff that I used to keep in different Word files, just in a folder. It's all sort of in one place. So that's Plotter, Plottr. And I am a recent devotee of that. And I guess, the only thing that I find, having done it both ways, I'm drawn more toward the plotting now and to formalizing it because I don't really trust my brain anymore. Like I've been in, pandemic crazy for so long that my brain is foggier than it used to be. And I want to know that I know where I'm going. So it's just sort of like a trust exercise for myself to know that I can get to the next scene and get to the next scene and have that sort of like security blanket of something written down. So I know Claire has a whole different process, and Claire and I are in the same writing group,
Yeah.
we talk about this and we see each other's processes all the time. So take it away, Claire.
Hello, everyone. I just want to say how funny this was, because when we were talking with Glenda about setting this up, and Margaret says, well, I need to share my screen because I have blah, blah, blah. And I thought, oh, you go first, because it's just like, because you've got everything laid out, you know what you're going to say. And I'm not going to say I'm completely winging it here. I have thought about what I want to say, but it was very, very ironic that even in something like, the screen presentation, that our two selves emerge. So first of all, I want to plug this book, Mystery Writers of America Handbook, How to Write a Mystery. And there is a chapter in there by Jeff Deaver, who is the plotter. And there's also a chapter by Lee Child, who's a pantser like me. And Lee Child makes a really, really interesting point that articulates why, and I have never been able to articulate this myself, but Lee has done it for me, why I feel that you should give a little, you should be not so rigid. And that is because I feel that the character should drive the plot. And character can't be planned. I enjoy the process of writing and discovering who this person is. And you might have an idea who a character is, but until you put them through their paces, story-wise, do you really know how they will react? When someone reads your book, or I read someone else's book, and then I stumble across a section where I feel, wow, that's out of character. It's out of character because the author's like, oh, wow, I need this person to stab this other person right here. But that doesn't make sense. But I really need them to do it. So like, hammer, 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 the square peg into the round hole. And that becomes an out of character moment. And I think that if you have too many out of character moments, then you're losing your reader. So my loosey-goosey approach is as follows. I always have a beginning, I have a middle, and I have an end. And I have never, ever, in the several books I've written, ever changed the end. The middle squishes back and forth. And I primarily have a middle, as Margaret says, you need a pivot point. Usually it's in a classic mystery, it's when the second body is discovered and the stakes are increasing. The pivot point is increasing stakes. So then I have a middle, it might move forward 10 pages, might move back 20 pages, but I have that middle because these act as goalposts for me, because when you are a pantser, there's a very big danger of just going off into the shiny, stupid land where none of this is germane, but wow, it really feels good to type it. And then you find yourself with a book that it doesn't make any sense, and then you have to go back. So I like the idea of having goalposts. And I don't feel the beginning is as important in a way, because I always change my beginnings. I'm very bad at beginnings, and it's very hard for me to write a beginning. But if I have these little goalposts along the way, then I can play with the characters. And every writer I know at some point says, wow, in a book where there's a lot of engagement with the reader, at a certain point, the character becomes so real to the writer that the character takes over. And you almost feel like a typist. And that is when I think that where this magic happens. And for me, having a real plotted scenario kind of takes away that magic, because then I need the character to hit this and hit that and hit the and maybe if I don't have them do that, if it's a little less defined, then I can discover something else about the character that maybe my subconscious was trying to get out, but was stymied because it was the candlestick in the library sort of thing. I also think that pantsing is a way to deepen your character and a way to, I am a character-driven writer, and I think this is part of it. I am a character-driven writer. And so for me, I see the plot as somewhat necessary, again, because then you're not writing 250,000 words of sheer nonsense. But I am a character-driven writer. And so when I see a plot, there are things I want to happen, but it makes me, I always look for that little edge that makes me sympathize, even with the murderer or a bad guy, and certainly the protagonist, something that is simple and I think can get lost when you're wrapped up in a lot of rigid plot points. Like, I'm terrified of a dentist. So I've written stories where people are terrified with dentists. You know what? A lot of people are terrified of dentists. And I can't, shoehorn that in just because, oh, wait a minute, I want my character to be terrified of dentists. But you need to create a vulnerability. And I feel that a really rigid plot scenario doesn't give me that flexibility personally. I'm just going to say this, that you can't sympathize with the plot, but you can sympathize with the character. So that's sort of some of my argument. Now, I have caveats on this. I always know what I want to say, and that is not about plot and it's not about character. It's a larger idea. In my first book, Beat Until Stiff, at the time I wrote this, I was a professional pastry chef and I was working in a kitchen that was 95% Latino. I have no idea how many people were actually legal, but at that time, Governor Pete Wilson was starting this anti-illegal campaign. And I just thought, oh, this is wrong. This is really, really wrong. And so I wanted to say something larger about, illegal and legal aliens who work in kitchens, because it's huge. It's a huge issue. And so I had a bigger thing in mind. I don't mean soapbox. I just mean something that's larger. What are you trying to say here? I will also admit that in this last book that I wrote, it was very plot oriented. And I finished it much faster. And I don't like the book as much. But I finished it. And I am going to invest in Plotter, because I discovered a timeline bust that had me dancing, on the head of a pin for a while. Like, oh my God, I've got a timeline thing. What do I do with this? And because, usually mysteries happen over a period of days. So you don't have a whole lot of room, and you don't want a whole lot of room to, you want things to be happening every single hour. And so I discovered that I was off by 24 hours, and I was supposed to have someone get picked up at the hospital at 3. And it, by the timeline that I had established, picked them up at 10 in the morning of the previous day. So I'm looking at Plotter for the timeline issues, because that ended up being, again, a nightmare that took me 2 weeks to solve. And who has 2 weeks to solve? So that's my take on it. I just think that being a pantser is, it's about the process. It's enjoying the process more. And you might not be as prolific as Margaret. I mean, the idea of me writing 3 books in, what was it, 20 months, Margaret?
Yeah.
I mean, I would have broken out in hives.
Well, I did. That's why I had to change my process.
Yeah. And so it is, but I think you can be much more productive. I'm not, like I said, I don't know if I love this book as much as my previous books, but I don't have any timeline busts either. So maybe we need a meeting of minds to a certain extent. And I really do recommend, if you have this book, read Lee Child's take on the creative process about pantsing your book, because I think he does say a lot of very important things about it. And it's that, and you know what, we all do it differently. What's important is that, how do we write a cohesive book, and you can type the end and then feel good about it.
Yeah.
And how you get there is very individual. And I mean, Margaret and I have been writing pals for 15 years, and we have completely different writing styles, and we appreciate each other's books. So there you are.
Yeah. And I don't think either of us are rigid. And I think that's really important. Like if I feel like, oh, I just had this great idea for this side thing I could do, I'm not going to be, completely beholden to what I wrote down in the plot. That's why I write those things in pencils on the calendar. And I know you are not going to just completely change, midstream. Oh, all of a sudden I'm writing a historical,
Right.
It's not,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So I think there are degrees.
There are degrees.
Yeah.
And I think part of the whole process of writing is find out what works for you best.
Right.
But it's also, don't box yourself in. I mean, here I am, the total pantser, and I'm finding myself looking at software that will, that will move me in the plotter, literally in the plotter direction. And maybe I need that at this point in my career. So I don't think you need to be rigid about it. I just think it's about winnowing through, how do we get there? How do we get to the end?
Yeah.
And I just like the surprise of having something that isn't as rigidly plotted, but I also do know what I want to say, and that helps. So you don't go herring off into,
Right. Well, and so you remember what day of the week it is, and if it's a Saturday and they're not going into the office that day, you kind of need to know that, rather than fixing it up 3 drafts in.
Right.
Yeah.
But I will say that I had finished the draft, and it was a solid draft. It was like a final.
I remember.
Draft.
Yeah.
It was a final draft, and then it was like, oh my God, I'm missing 24 hours. How could I do that? So now, that's the caveat, because that can happen. So your little timeline, looked pretty cool. So anyway, that's our words of wisdom.
Ta-da, such as they are. So, do we have any questions or?
There are some. I was wondering, Margaret, by using Plotter and having a pretty, really significant outline, how do you accommodate the characters' need to change? Like Claire, you were saying, or Lee Child was saying, there's got to be some flexibility. They've got to change. Do you find that you're just going through, and I was just wondering, how does your character change if things all of a sudden start going a different direction?
Right. Well, and I just, I let myself do that from time to time. You know, the plot is, to me, the plot is something that I can cling to if I need it. You know, if I'm having a bad day and I'm not sure what I'm doing, I've got something to look at. But when I'm in the flow, it recedes to the background, and I'm just going where, you know, where the characters lead, where the interest leads. Sometimes a character that I think will be a nobody all of a sudden will turn out to have a sense of humor, and so I'll want to feature them some more, because I am nothing if not show me the jokes, folks. So yeah, I don't think it's something that, you know, what, maybe if you're new to writing, if you're trying a new genre or something for the first time, you'll want to cling to a little bit more. But for me, it's sort of just, it's okay, I know where I'm going. I don't have to worry that I'm not going to have an ending for this book. I'm not going to wake up in the middle of the night and say, who's going to be the second body? You know, I know that sort of stuff. And it's a chance to leave breadcrumbs for the future. Like, oh, if I think of a witty line that somebody's going to say, I have a place to put that, so that when I get to it, I will remember that that line in that situation came to me. So it's not, you know, it's not like I'm in my day job, I'm a technical writer. And well, anyway, I have been a technical writer. And that sort of outlining and writing to spec is very different than this kind of writing. This is a suggestion, and it's a roadmap. It's not a straitjacket. At least I don't want it to be.
Okay.
No, I mean, I certainly don't feel like that when I read your stuff, that it's in a straitjacket, that we're doing boom, 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 this has to happen regardless. I also, Eileen Rendall did a wonderful presentation on Scrivener, which offers many of the same features, but Plotter seems very simpler. And so, I mean, Scrivener, I felt very intimidated by it. And I don't need to learn another computer program, but Plotter, I think, seems more simpler and more intuitive in a way. Although, you know, Eileen really did a great presentation, and it's worth revisiting that presentation, because Scrivener does many of the same things, like with the note cards and the timelines. And so that's another.
Yeah, and I've played with Scrivener, but like you, I found it intimidating. It seemed like it was a lot more than I needed.
Yes.
And I had to navigate to the parts that I just the parts that I needed. And so that's when I saw Plotter, I was like, oh, that's just the bit that I need. I can write in Word. I don't have to write in the same system where I outline.
Right, right. And that's why I think Plotter looks more attractive to me, because I do kind of want them in separate, I want them to be separate animals, because then I can tap into that creativity that I want in my writing, or where the character takes over.
Yeah.
And
yeah, Scrivener with me, I never forgot that there was like a database backend, and that I was like filling in forms, and then it would cobble it all together. And that felt too much like my day job writing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I do think that the most successful books are where, you know, you're not a character driven writer, you're not a plot driven writer, you're just like a writer. You know, where there isn't a focus on one or the other, they feed each other, and it's seamless. And those to me are the best books. And you know, that's what I would like to strive for. But you know, the reality is I'm much more of a character driven writer.
Claire, I have a question. You were mentioning that you have a start, you have a middle, you have an end, pretty much. I'm trying to figure out how do you know what happens in the middle? You know, where does that come from? Because when I've done things, I can usually come up with a pretty decent intro, and I'm finally now coming up with an end before I start. Because before I would just sit down and off I'd go, and I'd go in a gazillion different directions. But I am finding if there's at least a little bit of structure, it's easier. But the middle's a mess. So I'm just curious how you come to that point.
Well, I mean, talking to Margaret's breadcrumbs, I think that the point of a middle, and Margaret said it best, it is a pivot point. It's where I always try and have there is a sort of a a small aha where the character realizes that these stakes are improving, or they're increasing, that all of a sudden, wow, maybe I could get killed here, that there is a race against time. So in my books, what tends to happen is I have that pivotal moment, and then it is literally the last half of the book is where we're being thrown into situations where I often have my characters running because I want them to be running from the middle to the last page in the book. I have some sort of physical action. And that way, you get this sense of and then all of a sudden you're turning the pages because your main character is trying to stay alive and the plot points are falling fast and furious. And so it really is about, it is about that aha. And then of course, at the end, there's that big aha. This is the big reveal. And if you have that middle aha, then you have automatically increased the stakes that something has happened. It could be a second body. It could be the protagonist realizing that someone she thought was a nice guy is a not nice guy. It could be the revelation of a big lie. It's something that changes that all of a sudden there's danger signs. You've got the klaxons blaring. It's like, oh, okay, something is going to happen here and it might be bad. The last half of the book might be bad, or if it's a cozy, it's not too bad, but it should be something that has the reader literally skipping to the end so that they want to finish this book. And it's usually at the middle point where that happens, where all of a sudden the stakes become important. We're not playing here anymore. Mm-hmm. Even in a cozy, we're not playing a game here anymore. This isn't, we're not knitting at this point. We are, the yarn's unraveling, it's I'm not going to say panic stations because that's more towards the end where, the stakes are the greatest, but all of a sudden we have stakes in the middle. That's how I approach it.
Okay. You also, I think you both mentioned it's sort of when you find the second body. So is that second body basically the pivot point? Do you need a second body? Or is that just normal?
Well, I'd say it's kind of classic, don't you, Margaret? I mean,
I think so, yeah, because the first body, especially in a cozy, the first body, well, it could have been an accident. Well, it might not be the second body, oh, there's a pattern here, there's a killer on the loose. It's not, oh, somebody maybe killed someone in a fit of jealous rage. No, the second body raises the stakes. This person has killed twice and will kill again, and perhaps I'm in their sights, or someone that I love is in their sights, or that sort of thing. So I think generally the second body is when things get really real.
Yeah.
And if the protagonist has been telling themselves, oh, well, maybe it's just my imagination, this is when they stop and they say, no, this isn't my imagination, there's a killer.
Yeah. And I mean, the body is the easy part. I mean, you could even make it a lie. All of a sudden the protagonist discovers a lie or discovers some sort of financial shenanigans where it's a discovery process that I mean, I agree, the stakes all of a sudden are changing. We might be in Cabot Cove, but there's going to be a body around the corner. And so it is about it at that point the stakes should change, and a body is very convenient, because the first body might be, oh, they fell off that ladder and well, you discover later on, no, someone was pushed off that ladder. But if someone has is strangled or has a gunshot wound to their head and there's no gun, then it's murder. And it changes, it should change, even a cozy, it should change the trajectory of the end. Because, you want, I mean, part of the whole thing about a murder mystery is that you want this sense of danger. Although, when I think about it, you never really think that Hercule Poirot is going to get killed because he's just too smart for that. But in his case, what he has to do is stop all these other people from getting killed.
Right.
So it is either the protagonist is getting killed or the protagonist needs to stop the body count.
Okay, all right. I have a question, since you both have been in the same writers group for a while. Have you noticed changes in each other's approach to writing?
Hmm,
I'm just curious,
that's interesting. I never really thought about it.
Yeah.
just to play with it for maybe a minute or two.
I think maybe with this most recent one that you just finished,
Mhm.
seemed like you wrote it faster than
did.
any of the other books.
I did.
And I think that you had it more solidly in your mind.
Yeah.
The premise, the time, the characters, it seemed like you really just went flat out on that book.
I did. And I finished it in like 7-8 months, really.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
which is unusual for me. But I think part of that was because it's a historical. So I've got, I have anchors there. This book is set in 1930 San Francisco. And so, I have to figure out, the Bay Bridges aren't built yet. So I had a lot of anchor points, that I had to consider. Whereas suppose when you don't have a historical, then that net is really wide, and you have to actually pick and choose, as opposed to a given. I mean, that's the thing about a historical, you have a lot of givens.
Mhm.
And you don't, my first book, was set in a kitchen, and the only given that I had was that, yeah, you're gonna have stainless steel tables. So, but I don't think that I can say your writing is different. I would say it's deeper, because your first books were very, very, very funny. And I do think that over a timeline, that your books have gotten, I'm not going to say less humorous, but I think they have gotten more, I will say the stakes are higher. I feel that way about, your Demons book, that this is the stakes are much, much higher.
Mhm.
They're not, and even in the Movie Palace books, there's the undercurrent is I think greater and more menacing potentially. So
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. And I think part of that comes from, like, I've just gotten more confident as a writer, so I'm not
Yes.
relying so heavily on, look over here, glitter, glitter, look at all the glitter. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Although I
it's
still
not-
do love glitter.
you do love glitter, but it's not, you're not, and I'm not going to say that your first couple of books used jokes as a crutch, but you're not using the jokes as a crutch, if you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah. I don't have as many overtly comic characters.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You still do, but it's not, these books aren't madcap. Let me put it that way. So, yeah, I just think they're deeper, and they're dealing with deeper issues, if that makes sense.
Okay. Any agents who are in the crowd? We're both looking for representation.
Oh, yes, yes.
And we're both much better writers than when we started out.
Yes, we're much better. We're much better.
Well, I don't have any more questions, and I'm not sure if I'm having some problems getting them or not. But at this point, there's nothing there. I'm going to put myself back on and just say thank you to both of you so much. It's just really interesting to hear how different people write,
Yeah.
and what their process is. Mine's different, and I am trying to be more organized, and doesn't always work, but I am trying, because you're right, it saves time. If you have an idea of where you're going to go next.
Yeah.
Well, and I did want to say, Claire and I have talked about, we're in the same critique group. I really recommend that people work with a critique group, because then you can be exposed to people's different processes and maybe pick some things up, or maybe it'll just strengthen you in yours. But I do think that that sharing that in a group of, a safe, supportive group is really valuable.
And I'd also like to point out that in the previous MWA NorCal event, we had 3 self-published authors. And one of the key things that I took away from that was that if you're going to go the self-published route, you need to produce and produce and produce. And, and pantsing doesn't tend to lend itself to much producing, frankly. So, I mean, if I was going to seriously, and who knows, if I was going to seriously go the self-publishing route, then I will have to up my game in terms of how fast I put out a book. I mean, if you are under the gun to produce, a minimum of 2 books a year, that's a lot of writing. And I think you do need to probably be less pantsy and more plotty, because time is a factor.
Yeah.
And you don't have the luxury of losing readers, like, because they want the next book. You got to feed them.
Yeah.
So it is
Yeah.
it is an issue. It is an
Yeah.
issue.
Well, I want to thank both of you, Claire and Margaret. This has been really interesting. And for those of you who are watching, as soon as we end up here, within about 2 minutes, this is on the videos for the NorCal MWA page. So you can always go back and look at it whenever you want. We have all the videos actually from all of these presentations are up there. So anything that you missed, you can go back and look at. Now, we're not going to be here next month in April because the weekend we would normally have it is Left Coast Crime, and many of the people who, which is a conference, and many of the people who would be working on this or even, speaking of, will be there. But we will be back in May, and the title is Stop, You're Under Arrest. And George Kramer is going to be our guest speaker. He's former, you name it, policeman, worked on cold cases, worked internationally. So if you have questions about crime scenes, he'll be the one to answer. So again, thank you so much, Margaret and Claire.
Thank you, Glenda.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'll end this for today, and we'll see everybody in 2 months.
Great. Have a great time at Left Coast.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.